Okay, the absolute value of something is always positive. The absolute value of something is always positive. First we go 3 minus 8 is negative 5, but the absolute value of that is positive 5. The absolute value of negative 5 is 5. The absolute value of 2 is 2. That adds up to 7. The absolute value of 3 is 3. The absolute value of negative 7 is positive 7. This minus is here, and 3 minus 7 is negative 4. The absolute value of this is 10, plus the absolute value of 3 is 3. That adds up to 13. I'm going to eliminate these double signs. That becomes 8 minus 4, and we get 4. Remember, when you have stacked signs, a plus plus or a minus minus turns into a single plus, and one of each turns into a single minus. So that's why these turned into a minus. There's no double signs, so the rule is if the signs match, you add. If they don't match, you subtract. They don't match, so we subtract and get 8, but then we keep the sign of the bigger number, so we have negative 8. Here we have a positive and a negative. The signs don't match, so we subtract and we get 9, and we keep the sign of the bigger number, which is negative. Here the signs don't match, so we subtract and we keep the sign of the bigger number, which is positive. This double negative is going to turn into a positive, and we get 24. Here we're multiplying, you get 12, and you have an odd number of negatives in the multiplication. That makes this a negative. Here we're multiplying and we get 10, and we have an even number of negatives in the multiplication. An even number of negatives multiplies to a positive. Here we multiply and get 18, and there's an odd number of negatives, so this ends up as a negative 18. Here we have two signs without anything between them. That's a double sign, so that turns into a positive. Now I'm going to get a common denominator, so I'm going to multiply by 2 on the top and bottom, and I'm going to get 2/4. So we have a common denominator, so we end up with 4 on the bottom, and the top is a negative and a positive, so they don't match, so we subtract, we get a 1, and we keep the sign of the bigger number. The 3 is the positive, that's bigger, so this is a positive. There's lots of ways you can do this. I'm just going to go left to right, but I could have taken the positives and add them, the negatives and add them, and then do one subtraction. But I'm just going to go 7 minus 6 is 1. 1 plus 4 is 5. And 5 minus 10 is negative 5. First of all, we have a division with two negatives. Just like multiplication, this is going to become a positive. So now I'm going to forget the signs. I know it's positive. Whenever you divide, you keep the first fraction the same. Change it to a multiplication by flipping the second fraction upside down. And then 2 goes into 2 once, but into 4 twice. I multiply across the top to get 5. And I multiply across the bottom. 3 times 2 is 6. 0 divided by anything is 0. Any non-zero number divided by 0 is undefined. Don't put something like no solution or something like this. This is undefined. You have to spell out the word. 3 to the second power is 3 times 3, which is 9. Now you got to be careful with this. We have an exponent. The exponent gets applied before the negative gets applied. So only the 5, a positive 5, is in the base. So 5 squared is 25. Then we tack on the negative and we get negative 25. The common mistake is to think this is positive because you think you're doing a negative 5 squared, but you're not. You're doing a positive 5 squared and then applying the negative after that. Now this one's different. Because of the parentheses, the negative is also in the base. So this is negative 4 squared. See, this expands to like this. That's what that is. This expands like this. And this is a positive 16. 2 to the third power simply means 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. Any number except for 0 to the 0 power is 1. It's not 0. Any number. Doesn't matter what's down here. If it's to the 0 power, it's 1. Here we're going to square the top and the bottom, and we'll get 4 over 9. Here the negative is inside of the parentheses, so this negative gets squared away and it turns to positive. And then we square the 3 and we get 9, and we square the 4 and get 16. And it's positive because the negative is inside of the parentheses getting squared, not outside. By order of operation, we have to do the multiplication before we do addition. So this turns into a 6, and we get 11. I'm going to go left to right. 3 plus 4 is 7, which is 5. Again, I'm going to go left to right. 8 minus 5 is 3, and we get 5. Multiplication and division have the same level of priority, so whenever you see them, you have to go left to right. So 10 times 2 is 20. Now we divide by 4, and we get 5. Be careful because there's no parentheses here, so the negative is not on the base. So we square the positive 2 and get 4, and then we tack on the negative and we get negative 4. The signs don't match, so we subtract, and we keep the sign of the bigger number. So it's a negative 1. There's a lot going on here, so I'm going to do it one step at a time. I got negative 2 times bracket. This turns into a negative 3. And then we have plus, and I can just do this right now because I do the division before I do an addition. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. Okay, now I have negative 2. Negative 3 squared, because this is in the parentheses, this becomes a positive 9. Oops, what did I just do? And this is negative 2 times 14. So we end up with negative 28. Negative 7 is less than negative 2, so this is true. 8 is greater than 4. This is true. Negative 3 is not greater than 1. The number line is negative 1 over here and negative 3 over here. So negative 3 is less than 1, so this is false. Over here, negative 7 plus negative 1, or negative 7 minus 1 is negative 8. Negative 10 plus 2 is also negative 8. If this were just a less than, I'd say false. But because it's a less than or equal, and these are equal, this is true. These are like terms, so we add up the 3 plus 2 and get 5x. Here I'm going to combine. This and this combine to 9x. And then positive 3 and negative 5, that's I'm subtracting because the signs don't match, and I get negative 2. Here we're going to distribute the 4, and we'll get 8x minus 12. Here we're going to distribute the 5, and we'll get 5x plus 5, and then we'll distribute the positive 2 and get a positive 6x minus 8. And then this and this add up to 11x. And this, the signs don't match, so I subtract and I get 3. But the bigger one, the 8, is negative, so this is a negative 3. So 11x minus 3. Here I'll distribute the 4 and get 4x plus 8. I'll distribute the negative and the 3, and we'll get negative 3x plus 12. This is a positive because we have a negative times a negative. And then we're going to combine. This and this add up to 1x. And this add up to a positive 20. Okay, here I'm going to distribute the 4, and we'll get 4x minus 20. And then this is just a 2x sitting there. And then I'll distribute the negative and the 3, and we'll get negative 6x minus 3. And then we have that plus 2 just sitting there. And then looking at my x's, I have this, and this. So 4 plus 2 is 6. 6 minus 6 is 0. This is 0x, so we're not going to write any x's. Because if we wrote the x, it'd be like writing a 1x. So we don't write any x's. Then we'll look at the numbers. We have negative 20. That adds up to negative 23. And negative 23 and a positive 2 give us a negative 21. And that's it. Now, calculators are not allowed, so this looks like it's an awful problem because we don't want to multiply these numbers. They're too big. But if you notice, this is an addition here, and we have a multiplication and multiplication, and we have a common factor of 23. So you can pull out the 23 and backward distribute. It's called factoring. This will be a 14 plus an 86. Now notice that this works because if we were to distribute this, we would get 23 times 14 plus 23 times 86. Okay, so that works, and this adds up to 100, which is just 2300. Again, this looks like a horrible problem because we don't want to multiply this and we don't want to multiply by this, but we have a common factor of 8.46, so I can backward distribute, and we're going to have a 17 minus a 7. And this works because this times this is this, and this times this is this. But this subtracts to a 10. And when you multiply by 10, you just move that decimal over 1, so you have 84.6. Here we have 3 items, okay? They all have a 32 in them. So I can take out the 32, and I'm going to have this minus this plus this. So I have 26 minus 32, oh, I'm sorry, minus 20 plus 4. This is 32 times 26 minus 20 is 6. 6 plus 4 is 10. So this becomes a 320. 0 multiplied by anything is 0. So this is just 0. If I were to distribute this, I would get 6x plus 12. So this is the distributive property. Here we have an equals. Notice that this is a negative 4 times 5, and this switched around and became a 5 times negative 4. When you switch the order of the operation and it still is equal, that's the commutative property. Notice the only thing different on each side of the equal signs is the grouping. The grouping is the way you associate something. So if you change the association and you still have an equality, that's the associative property. So remember, the associative property is when you change the grouping symbols, the parentheses. You reassociate. By adding 0 or multiplying by 1, you don't change anything. This then is the identity of this. So this is the identity property.